All right, that was tiring. So we just finished planting 800 trees, mostly myself. And I have to say, guys who do this for a living all summer long, they're planting about 1 to 3,000 trees on average a day. And what I just did here was 800 trees in about 3/4 of a day. So I'm on the slower end of what a professional tree planter would have done, and I'm pretty tired. So those guys that are out there in the field for months at a time, out in the forest doing forestry work, commend you. That's a lot of work. I I think I would get in better shape. These shovels definitely helped a lot. They saved my life. They are very, very efficient. A very thick, strong, sturdy blade. You can pull on these things as hard as you want, and they will never break. I'm sure people have broken them, but apparently some tree planters like the shorter style, and others like the longer style. I bought two, and my kids were helping me. I let them use the shorter one. But myself, whenever I was landscaping, I always liked the staff handle, these longer handles without the D. And I found when I was walking along that I kind of was using it to balance myself going over terrain and walking over logs and stuff like that. So definitely helpful, but for efficiency, I could see how being in the field all day, if you want to plant, let's say 5,000 trees in a day, you don't want to go up and down like that, 5,000 times. That would burn a lot of excess energy. So I can see how having a shorter shovel and staying bent over the long haul would be greatly beneficial to planting more efficiently. The Also, this one, you don't have to lift your arm up. You just kind of walk along, keep it low, step on the thing, and it goes in the ground. This one, I don't know, I still prefer a staff handle myself. I'm probably in the minority of people that would prefer that. But yeah, as an older guy, not that old guys, but old enough that I'm not going to keep up with the 21-year-old guys anymore. And these are amazing tools. So if you're ever going to do a lot of planting, highly recommend getting one of these. I do plan on using this in the future for digging up trees, because what we did here on the farm is we planted perimeter shelter trees. There's been a lot of beaver damage. I'm just standing in front of our pond, or in front of a small little lake here that we have on the property. And a few years back, the beavers absolutely devastated all the poplars, all the deciduous trees basically from around here. So what we did is we planted all conifers. And if you know kind of how boreal forests develop, it starts as grassland, goes into aspen trees, deciduous forest, and then the coniferous trees start coming in. So we just went straight to coniferous, and they'll be less of a target for beavers. They don't like eating them. And yeah, the longevity of this ecosystem is going to be enhanced by doing that. So why did we plant so many trees? We have a lot of trees on this property. That is a forest right behind me, but it is across the lake from where the main farming happens and where the buildings are. And where our buildings are, it used to be a lot more sheltered, but as big farmers get bigger, they take out shelter belts, they take out those little small ponds and those eco buffers. They literally take bulldozers in and they fill in those ponds, and they mitigate their water problems, and they cause it to go downstream, which I've heard in some instances completely wiping out family farms with flooding. There's a place that I know of, I'm not going to tell you guys exactly where it is, between Saskatoon and Prince Albert. And the childhood farm of this person no longer exists because it's underwater. And that is because a lot of these farmers are pushing their water problems onto the next landowner downstream, which is not good. Now there's big farmers out there who are going to be disagreeing with me, because all they're concerned about is maximizing production. And the bigger the tractors get, they don't want to be driving around these little ponds in their fields. But I have noticed a dramatic change from when I grew up out here, and now that I've returned, just how much windier it is, because just in the mile to the northwest of where we are, there have been 1, 2, 3, 4 shelter belts totally ripped out in the last 10 years, and that has caused our property to be a wind tunnel. All of those little eco buffers and those shelter belts that exist where I live were not planted shelter belts. Those were native stands of trees that the original homesteaders left standing, and now the big farmers are coming in and wiping those out. I do not agree with that practice. It is, I think the more time man has started spending in tractors, the less connected to the actual climate that we feel. And when you're actually out on your feet on the land and you feel that wind blasting through and getting sand blasted in the face, you feel the effects of that. But when farmers are living their lives in tractors, and in some cases, these big farmers are actually putting forward motions right now with their local governments advocating that people can't subdivide their farmland anymore, like the 160-acre quarters. They don't want people breaking off little acreages for their houses anymore because they just want to be able to drive for 3 miles straight in a perfectly straight line in their monoculture crop production. And to those farmers that are pushing that, I would have to say this: you better watch your back, because what's happening right now in automation and artificial intelligence, you guys are next. You think that you're safe, you're a big farmer, you have 5,000 acres. Well, when artificial intelligence comes in and you got farmers who own 200,000 acres, they're gonna wipe you out. So you better stop trying to wipe out the little guys. So I'll leave it there. Something to think about when farming starts serving machines and bigger and bigger equipment instead of serving humans. I have to vehemently disagree with all of that. So, the purpose of our shelter belts on this property are threefold. We got privacy, we have creating microclimates so that in horticulture production it's much more important that we have stable microclimates for vegetable production. We can grow less hardy crops quicker when we can increase our temperatures using shelter belts and trees strategically. Privacy is another issue where, I just don't want people to be able to look into my property whenever they feel like it. So we want to have a little bit of privacy for our family, and that's what we're achieving right now. And the other aspect that we are working towards is more eco buffers. So that issue that I just described, where farmers are plowing under little sloughs and little bodies of water that are on their property, well, you will probably notice if you drive around rural Saskatchewan, Alberta, that you'll see big piles of trees being ready to be burned, big slash piles, and those will never come back. Now, those are where a lot of deer and smaller animals would live, and I've noticed over my lifetime that there's less deer populating all the fields around here. There's nowhere for them to hide anymore, so they're driven into the trees that are left. So we are doing our best to preserve the mix of agriculture and natural ecosystems on this property. And yeah, that's where we're at right now. We planted a bunch of trees into the existing poplar and deciduous rows that we have on the property, with the expectation that the shelter belts, which are more of a temporary nature when they're deciduous, will become a self-rejuvenating shelter belt that you don't have to plant into the future. But when you put coniferous trees into those deciduous trees, we are going to be left with more of a 12-month shelter belt. So when deciduous trees are left in the winter time, obviously the leaves go away and they don't buffer as much of the winter wind. So by planting the coniferous trees in amongst the dense deciduous forest, we're increasing the shelter that we'll have on this property, which when it gets to be -40, you appreciate every bit of that. Now, the number I remembered is for wind protection, the height of the tree times 12 is how much wind protection you get downwind from from a tree. So when that's another thing, when you have fields that have shelter belts every quarter mile or so, that does a lot to slow down the power of a storm overall. And when you have all of your shelter belts taken out, that wind tunnel effect happens. Now, if we create little pockets, so if we have a pocket of trees here, one over here, one here, one here, you know, you can still move around freely within those islands of trees, but we have a more natural shelter belt and wind defense versus just planting straight rows of trees. Maintaining those little island and little pockets within the farmer's fields actually does a lot more to buffer the effects of wind when there's a lot of those that exist. So I do understand that when, you know, farmers are starting to have massive seeding equipment and stuff, it really does become difficult to go around those little pockets. But I honestly think enough of them have been removed in today's economy that we don't need to keep doing it. So that's my little spiel on why I'm planting trees. And yeah, hopefully you found that somewhat useful. If there's any other questions on exactly how to go about doing it, what to plant, you know, things like what zone you might be in, what trees you can actually plant, those are also important topics. But for now, just know that I'm in northern Saskatchewan, Canada, and it's a very harsh climate, zone 2B, borderline zone 3 where I live. And the plants that I have access to that will grow here are much less than what somebody in, say, zone 4 or 5 or 6 is going to have access to. And what we chose to do here is plant black spruce closer to the water, and then lodgepole pine and jack pine, which are all native tree species to this region, up in the drier sections of the property. So anyway, thank you guys very much, and we'll be seeing you again.